And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Monday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is the second anniversary of the release of a film that I really like and a lot of people didn't, fans and critics alike. And it is a comic book movie. It is a superhero movie. And strangely enough, because I am a fan of superhero films, going all the way back to my parents taking me to see the insuperable original Superman. I understand that's DC and I'm going to be talking about MCU. But my parents took me to see Superman the movie, the first part of 1979. And cliche though it may be, I believed that a man could fly. But I haven't talked that much about the MCU on the channel, just here and there, incidentally. But I am an enormous fan of almost all of the movies from the initial run up to and including this film, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantamania, which was released on this day, 2023. Now, there are times where I go into a film and my kind of reaction may be tilted slightly based on what other people have said. I realize that it's not a good thing to allow yourself to be, have your opinion swayed by others. Not that my opinion being swayed, but sometimes having lowered expectations, it's not the worst thing. It might up the enjoyment factor in the same way that if people are telling you for your entire life that Shawshank Redemption is the greatest film ever, well, that's really tough to live up to. In the case of Shawshank, it usually lives up to the hype. But when Ant-Man Part 3 was released, the critical reception was kind of lukewarm, and that got me off of wanting to see it immediately. And there are moments in our lives that don't really seem that big, that important, that when we look back on them and think on them, they've turned into real, what I would call golden hued memories. And so Quantumania came out and it didn't do great. If you just look at the raw box office numbers, somewhere between 475 and 500 million worldwide gross. That's phenomenal. That's a crazy amount of money. The problem is they put the full weight of the MCU and the entire the budget that Peyton Reed, the filmmaker, very talented filmmaker, was able to do, and the marketing push, all in, the film cost, they say 388. Let's just say it was somewhere between 350 and 400 to produce, market, etc. So it really was not successful. And in the United States, it was the first film like MCU of that run that did not turn a profit. And within the first week and a half in release, it was understood this film missed the mark, or it's not what fans were hoping for, or this is all played out. They should have just stopped after Avengers Endgame, etc., 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 etc. We all remember what was being talked about. So this was the time that my sister and I had started the process of selling our father's house. Our dad passed away in the summer of 2022. Dad lived in Huntington, just outside Huntington Village, for those, Long Islanders, many of whom live nowhere near Huntington, but are familiar with the village, if for no other reason than Paramount Theater and or the book review, which sadly closed in 2021. So Dad's house was just outside the village near Huntington High School. And there are two movie theaters in Huntington Village, one of which is an independent theater called the Cinema Arts Center. So a lot of memorable movies there, including, for the third time, which is not really a good thing, Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salo, or 120 Days of Sodom. Horrendous, horrific, disgusting, awful movie, considered a masterpiece. So there's the Art House Theater, and then there's an eightplex. It's called the Shore 8 of Huntington. So on a random night, it was about 5:30. It was just dark out, 5:30 to 6. And my sister was in her old room at my dad's house, and I was, getting stuff together because we had Dad didn't have very much junk in his house, but we had a lot of things that we needed to figure out. If you're moving, if you're, whatever it is, what are we keeping? What are we throwing away? What's going into storage? And what would I be taking with me to my new place? Just normal stuff. So I finished doing what I was doing. Jessica was reading. And then she said, hey, do you feel like going to see a movie? Now, as a much younger person, I was not spontaneous, not even the slightest, tiniest bit. If my night was supposed to be, I'm going to be home and maybe I'm going to play poker or do whatever it is I'm going to do, that's it. That's all I'm doing. But as I've gotten older, I'm more open to instant suggestions. So when my sister said, do you feel like going to the movies? There was a part of me that was imagining a run out here where my sister and I would be going our separate ways pretty soon after this. And, she was going to be moving to New Hampshire and I was going to be still on Long Island. And here we are together. So I immediately said, yeah, let's see what's playing. And the best fit for the fact that we were 5 minutes from the Shore 8 in Huntington, Quantamania was playing, and it was starting in like 20 minutes from us having this conversation at my dad's house. So I said, well, I know the reviews aren't good, but it looks good. I want to see it. And Jessica says, yeah, me too. Let's go. So spur of the moment. I'm not going to say how old my sister is, but at the time, I'm 49 years old, and I'm suddenly excited to go to the movies. I hadn't been to the movies in quite some time. I'd watched a lot of movies on streaming, but I hadn't actually gone. I don't remember the last movie that I had seen before this in theaters. So we went to the Shore 8 and watched the movie. And knowing that the critical reception was muted and a lot of people who were talking, and this is not a criticism, on Facebook, they didn't really like it. A couple of people said, I don't know why everyone is down on this film. It's great. But the general sense was it was a disappointment. So I went into the movie expecting it to be just okay. And if I hadn't read or heard anything, I would have given this film 3.5 stars out of 4. I didn't like it as much as the first one, but I think I actually preferred it to the second one. There were a lot of surprises, and as a Generation Xer, and I'm not going to apologize for this either, seeing Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer get to play these kinds of characters, real serious characters, even within the confines of the ridicularity of this movie. Everybody miniaturized. They could have done a joke with the Matt Damon character from Downsizing. You know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, it would have been a great idea. How about we cross-pollinate Matt Damon miniaturized, and then he ends up in Quantamania, and all he does is complain, because most of that movie, it's 90% is Matt Damon's character bitching and moaning. But to see Michael Douglas with that glint in his eye, knowing that he's got a great role to play, and Michelle Pfeiffer, who, let's be honest, she looks dynamite in this film. Absolutely dynamite. She seems to have aged only about 15 years since the early 1980s. I don't know how that's possible. But I enjoyed the movie. I love the sets. I love the mixture of practical effects with CGI. It wasn't all CGI. There are certain things that you can quite clearly see are real sets. And if they weren't, well, they sure fooled me. And I was with the story the whole way through, the kind of mild arc with the daughter and, Scott Lang going through his own stuff, and the Wasp, her going through Evangeline Lilly's character with her thing, and Michael I thought the film was terrific. And the somewhat notorious Jonathan Majors, I didn't like his performance as Kang. It just didn't work for me. I had not seen any of Jonathan Majors' Kang in Loki, the TV show. So I had no frame of reference. But I felt that his performance just didn't work for me. It didn't work. And I didn't, I loved what he did in I almost said Apollo, in Creed 3. Although his character was a little bit ridiculous, I really liked his performance in that film. I just didn't like his character of Kang, and it didn't work. And I didn't think that MODOK, I see what they were trying to do. I had a few laughs, but the character of MODOK didn't work either. So it's strange that I'm telling you how much I enjoyed this movie when the main villain I thought was not really that well thought out. And MODOK was, to me, a character that I'm supposed to be laughing at, even if he's a killer. I just thought it was hilarious the way he was represented with the head and the whole thing. The way that Paul Rudd's Scott Lang relates to him is just amazing. Like, Paul Rudd he's almost a cheat code, even though he still comes across as very young. He's mid-50s, he's older than me, but he is so likable. He is such a likable actor, and his performance in this film, I think, is the best in any of the Ant-Man movies. He sells it. He makes, or at least he made me believe that this guy knows the stakes and he's going to go down. If it means that if his daughter is in danger, he will risk his life without any hesitation. And he is very selfless for someone who in the first movie was like a petty criminal. And again, he is more a figure of fun than any other character in the MCU, even though the movies kind of lightened up as time went on. Thor Love and Thunder, which, for example, I thought was very entertaining, was really silly. I mean, Russell Crowe had me screaming almost his entire performance. I thought that was super entertaining, but it was very, very light. And this movie gets into some darkness because the character of Kang has killed so many hundreds of millions of people, how many civilizations he's destroyed. And you get into this where you say to yourself, well, you can't really beat Kang because he exists in so many forms in so many different galaxies. Like, what are you supposed to do? And we're not going to get to see, we have Avengers Doomsday instead of what I think Kevin Feige and everyone else was originally, thinking about. The way that I look at any movie, if it's something really heavy, that's different. But for a film that's just supposed to entertain, like a comic book movie, I've seen Ant-Man Quantamania 3 times from start to finish. I saw it once in theaters and twice at home on Disney. And each time I was into the story, and I just allowed the film to work on me. The incredible visuals, the infinite Scott Lang's trying to help him. The movie never lagged. The pacing to me is perfect. And the balance of the kind of silly humor and laughs with the stakes of the story, which are significant, with Michelle Pfeiffer's character getting stuck down in Quantamania. And, well, we got to go get her. We got to rescue her. We can't. And even though it's just a cameo, Bill Murray is an absolute scream. The 5 minutes with Bill Murray are absolute gold. No surprise, because Bill Murray is amazing in almost everything he does. Even when he appears to not be engaged, he's still funny because he's Bill Murray. He just, with a glance, and we start cracking up. There's decades of our expectations of what he's probably thinking right now, and he can get laughs just basically sitting there doing nothing but ordering a drink, and somehow it's funny. I don't know. I don't really get why so many people, what the sort of outsized expectations were for this film. It's just a fun story that is not out of place. If you want to say that it's out of place with the MCU, I mean, I would argue that the Ant-Man character, you could say that he shouldn't be in the MCU. He should have been a side character, but that really has nothing to do with it. That's neither here nor there. And in Infinity War and Endgame, I thought that he was terrific and he played a pretty important role. I thought it worked. The sort of tone shifts in this film didn't really bother me. You could argue that Kang is a character of such grim, when he's basically like a Grim Reaper type of a character, that he should not be an antagonist in a movie featuring Ant-Man. That's a separate issue. And before Jonathan Majors, the actor, before he had his legal troubles, I remember Simu Liu, who played Shang-Chi in that movie. I guess he had a look at what the early ideas were for the next phase of MCU, and he said something to the effect of, well, with Kang, it looks like the Avengers are pretty much screwed, meaning there's no way to defeat this. There's no way to defeat Kang. It can't be done. They're all going to die. And they kind of tease that a little bit in Quantumania when Kang, with a straight face, asks Ant-Man, have I killed you before? And then there's a little joke about the good-looking Avenger, you know, that being him and not Thor, and all of that. But to me, that kind of humor works, and did work. And the effects-heavy moments are so well orchestrated, and quite frankly, the technology is so good now that even though there are entire action sequences which are nothing but computers and green screen, I personally was not taken out of the fiction. And this is something where technologically, I'm sure Martin Scorsese and Francis Coppola and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas could have a nice argument, not about comic book movies, but they could have a nice argument about, is it ever okay to just use computers for special effects sequences and a couple of actors as green screen and that's it? Martin Scorsese would probably say that's not cinema. That's amusement park shit. And George Lucas would say, well, Marty, I love you, but you're wrong. It is cinema. But the technology now is so good, it feels seamless. It doesn't look like a computer anymore. Whereas you go back a little over 2 decades, and I love The Matrix Reloaded, but that brawl with hundreds of Agent Smiths versus Neo, it looks like a video game. Nothing to me in Ant-Man Quantumania is so blatantly, flagrantly CGI that it takes me out of the fiction. And I think this movie is terrific. And a lot of critics, whatever their expectations were, I think they missed the boat. And I think there are a lot of audiences that, I don't know if they were expecting something on the order of Endgame or Infinity War, but for what it is, I don't think that it's as good as the last Guardians of the Galaxy film, which I really, really liked. But Ant-Man Quantumania, it's a better movie than Thor Love and Thunder. Not as good as Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok I really liked. And it's certainly not as good as the first and second Captain America sort of standalone, even though they're not really standalone, but the first one is. But to me, it fits neatly within, when we think of the MCU, I feel like Scott Lang's Ant-Man is canon and is part of it because the first Ant-Man movie was released in 2015, 3 years after the Avengers. So yeah, my story of seeing Ant-Man Quantumania and being very pleasantly surprised on its, well, it wasn't the opening night, it was the following week, but being very pleasantly surprised by how well the film worked, how entertaining it was, how funny it was, and in spots, how thrilling it was. Ant-Man Quantumania, released on this day, 2023, directed by Peyton Reed and starring Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, Michael Douglas, Michelle Pfeiffer, Jonathan Majors, and a hilarious Bill Murray. This has been episode 447 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.